Storage development step 2, excavation. Hey there, this is Seth, and in this video we're going to talk about the second big step in the process of developing this self-storage facility, and that is excavation. Now, excavation is a huge job for this property. The property itself has some issues in terms of the topography, in that it was kind of like bowl-shaped, where right after you step off the southwest corner intersection, it almost kind of like drops off a cliff a little bit and goes really steep, and then it kind of levels out. But because of that steep drop, it meant that we had to either spend a ton of money to haul in 15,000 yards of fill to fill in that empty space, or we would have to get a little creative with where we put the entrance and how we decided to level this thing out. So originally, when I talked to my civil engineer, we had mapped out the driveway entrance to just have one of them coming in from the south side right in the middle of the property. And if the topography hadn't been such an issue, that would have been totally fine, but because if we put it there, it would have required a pretty steep downgrade driveway, which not only can be a little bit dangerous just when you get big trucks trying to go downhill in the middle of the winter, but it also would have just required a whole lot of fill material to bring in and level it out to keep it from getting too steep. And after seeing how problematic it was to have this driveway right in the middle, it suddenly occurred to me, hey, why don't we just move this driveway all the way over to the east, as far as we can go to the right by the neighbor, where it's almost a level drive and you don't have the steepness, and you could also just bring the level of the entire site down a bit and you wouldn't have to bring so much fill material on site. And everybody on my team, the civil engineer and consultants and general contractor, they were all like, yeah, that would probably work. So we ended up moving the driveway over there, and that pretty much solved that problem. This was the first of many different situations in this development and design process of just finding ways to save money, because there are so many ways you can way overspend if you're not constantly looking for ways to be more efficient and just do things that are going to be just as good, if not better, but cost a lot less money. Whether it's in this design stage or even like the building materials or the products or the contractors you hire, all this stuff can add up big time. Sometimes it was me that identified this stuff, like in this situation, but in a lot of times it was actually my general contractor who found all kinds of ways to save me like well over 6 figures in this process, just by challenging some of the assumptions that the different engineers were making and asking questions, and just using his own local market expertise to say, no, I don't think we actually need that type of foundation, or I think there's actually a better way to handle this drainage ditch over here, or I don't actually think that is required in this local building code. So we moved the driveway over there, and it basically fixed that problem, so much so that in the end we would actually have to take 3,000 yards off of this property instead of bringing 15,000 yards on. So it definitely solved the issue of having to truck in a whole lot of dirt. However, it didn't change the fact that this property still needed a whole lot of rearranging. This was not just a flat lot where you can just clear trees and be ready to go. And because we had to dig out a big retention pond over on the north end of this property, that was also going to require a whole lot of extra work. One really nice thing about this property is that all of the soil is very sandy, which is perfect when you want soil that's going to drain well. The kind of soil you don't want for drainage is clay, and there wasn't really any clay on this property. So that was just really nice from a drainage standpoint. And the excavation didn't really start on this project until early September, and even as I record this video right now, they're still finishing it up near the end of October. So it's a pretty huge job that they were working on for quite a while. The only unexpected cost that came up in this stage was we discovered this old telephone line running through the easement right in front of the property, so we couldn't really touch anything that was in that easement. And the landline itself, like the wire, was actually a dead line. It wasn't being used for anything, so it was just kind of pointless. It wasn't serving any purpose, but still it wasn't our property, so we couldn't touch it. And this line by itself was pretty ugly looking, kind of an eyesore, but what was even worse was that there was this huge tree that had actually started to grow around the line itself. So we could only hack off the top half of this tree and we couldn't get the bottom half, because if we were to do that, we would take down the line, which we're not allowed to touch. Only AT&T can come out and move that. So we had to end up getting a hold of AT&T, and then we had to pay almost $9,000 for them to come in and remove that line. And if we didn't do that, which we could have just left it there, but it would have been just a hideous eyesore right in front of the property. So this was just one of those unexpected costs, and this is why you have a construction contingency, which exists for no other reason than to cover these unexpected costs that are bound to come up. This kind of thing is very, very common, where these weird things out of left field come in, whether it's unexpected and it happens to you, or you just change your mind about what you want to do along the way and it ends up costing a little bit more, and you're really thankful that you have that contingency there and that you budgeted for it. One other thing we chose to do was move 2 of the existing power poles from the local utility company, mainly because one of them right in the center was going to be right in the middle of the drive lane of our RV and boat parking area. So it would be like right in the middle of where cars need to drive through. And the other one over on the west side of the property was situated in a place where our excavators were going to have to dig down about 10 feet from where the surface of the ground originally was. So we had to get that pole not moved, but just reset. So it wasn't going to go anywhere, but if we didn't have them come in and reset it, the thing would just topple over. And it was kind of interesting, the timing of this, because Consumers, which was the local power utility company, wasn't going to come out and do this until it was time to install the power on the actual buildings. And the buildings obviously were not up yet at this point because they were just doing excavation. So as I record this, those poles still have not been moved, but the excavators just had to work around them. And the excavators will basically have to come back after the fact and get rid of those mounds of dirt that will be left over after those poles are moved. And that was a planned expense, and that was just over $12,000 to move and reset those 2 poles. And for me, it was really kind of just fascinating to watch these guys work. I dropped in here about once or twice a week just to see how it was going. And I'd never actually done this, where I visited an excavation site and watched on a weekly basis to see what they were doing and how they were doing it. These guys basically handle everything from moving the soil around to bringing any new soil on site that they need. Like, for example, for the driveway, they had to dump a bunch of rocks so that the soil wouldn't wash away, and then that would also act as the foundation for the new driveway that they would eventually be putting down. And because of how we revised the plan, so that we ultimately had to remove 3,000 yards of soil from the property to make way for the retention pond. One creative idea my general contractor had was to build a little berm on the north end of the property, because our neighbors to the north actually wanted a visual barrier there so that they wouldn't have to see people or car headlights shining in their windows or anything like that. We were originally planning to put a big fence and leaving a lot of trees there to block it, which we're still going to do, but because they want that kind of visual barrier, and because we needed a place to put some of this extra dirt, we were like, hey, let's just build a berm there, and that'll serve that purpose as well, and you can still mow it, and it'll just give us a place to put this, and we can save some money so we don't have to truck so much of it off. So we did that as well. But otherwise, yeah, this was probably the biggest single step of this entire project, just getting the property laid out the way it needs to. And this is also an important consideration for anybody out there who's considering building a new storage facility. I know when I first started investigating this, all the numbers that I had been told by different storage building manufacturers was that, yeah, the estimated cost you should plan on, including the cost of your land, is about $25 per square foot. Those numbers have already gone way up because of inflation and all that. But the thing I want to point out is that those numbers really can't take into account the excavation cost and the site prep work that goes into your lot. If you have a super simple lot that is flat and it doesn't require a whole lot of engineering, then those numbers might be accurate, depending, of course, on how much you're paying for that lot. But in my case, even though I got a pretty decent deal on the lot itself, it required a ton of work for the site prep, which totally threw off that whole $25 per square foot number. It didn't even come close to that, not by a long shot. So just keep that in mind if you're ever looking to to plan out and build a new storage facility, figuring out the cost of those buildings, including the cost of your land, you really can't possibly know that, especially if it's a complicated lot, until you really start getting some cost estimates from excavators, which they can't do until they have some kind of a civil engineering design. I wish it was as simple as everybody tries to make it sound, but it was definitely not the case for this project. And the next step after this is to pour the foundations so they can then place the buildings on those foundations. And that's going to be the next little progress report video when that's all finished. If you want to see the previous or future steps in the process, I will include links to those in the description below. And I hope that through watching these steps, you are educated to some extent, or at the very least entertained by what this process looked like for me. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.